Tonight we're going to discuss the social and gender and economic developments in classical Greece. So we're going to cover a broad spectrum, and we're briefly going to describe Hellenism, which is the spread of Greek culture, be it political, social, or economic. And Hellenism is most well known for being spread by Alexander the Great. You're going to need to pause and use your textbook to fill in the map, to fill in Rome, Athens, Sparta, Carthage, and the Mediterranean and Egypt. You may be able to do this based on your memory from yesterday. However, if not, you may need to refer to your textbook. So a reminder on timing. Greece, the civilization exists on the peninsula from around 800 BC to 600 BC. Remember that a peninsula is a body of land surrounded by water on three sides. Athens is the largest city-state in Greece, and it reaches its height around 500 BC and stretches till 449 BC. And Sparta reaches its height around the same time. And those are the two city-states we're going to focus on today. Sparta reaches its height during and immediately following the Persian War. This should make you think of the movie 300, perhaps, if you've seen it. So social structures in Athens, you see a photo of a Grecian urn. Notice the image going on the urn. An urn is used to hold liquid or ashes, etc. It's like a vase. So the democracy in Athens plays a role in its social structure. It emphasizes rational thought, reason, philosophy. We have a big emphasis on coming up with new ideas and philosophical writings. Our three big thinkers you should know from your text and your reading, but they are Aristotle, Socrates, and Plato. Citizens, to be a citizen, you had to be male, you had to own land, and you had to be at least 18 and born in Athens. So it was pretty tight restrictions in order to be a citizen, even though it was the first democracy. There were many free people with no rights. So think of women, think of people who didn't own land. So they were free, they weren't slaves. However, they didn't have the same rights and access that citizens did. And then there were slaves. There was a large slave population in Greece. They were usually product of warfare, that they were conquered and then made into slaves, etc. You may be familiar with Greek mythology, but Greek religion in Athens is based on mythology. So we have gods who are very similar to living humans who make mistakes. And they have a story to tell, and we can learn from our gods. They are also famous for epic poetry. You may be familiar with some of the epic poems, otherwise you will be this year. But we have the Odyssey by Homer and the Iliad, which are both epic poems. Athenian art. There's a great deal of sculpture. The Kuros. The Kuros is actually, you can see here in the sculpture, typically made out of marble, typically of young men. The muscles are shown, the form of the body is shown. And so think about what the civilization might value or what might be different about them, given that this was a common form of art. Oftentimes the sculptures also were life-size, so huge marble sculptures, detailed, and it really idealized the male body. There is our pottery. So we have a lot of urns and pottery with scenes on them. They tell a story. They were decorative urns. So rather than having canvases like you might be used to, we have sculptures and paintings on pottery. Here we're switching over to Athens. Sparta. And what you see here is a scene of a training camp for young men. Spartan men were sent to train and learn military techniques as young as 6 years old. So there was a large aristocracy in Sparta, meaning nobility. Then there was the peasantry, and then there were slaves. Here on the left, we have a Grecian urn. It's depicting women, seams with women in them. Notice their dresses, the materials they have, etc. And on the right, we have a Spartan sculpture of a woman. Notice how she is rather plain, athletic looking, simple. So we're going to compare women in Athens and Sparta. In Athens, women were not citizens. It was very uncommon for them to own land, and there was a really high literacy rate among the upper class. This may be related to their emphasis on philosophy and thinking about government. Women could be priestesses, so they had a religious role. Again, remember that in Athens we had mythology was our main religion. In Sparta, women were citizens. They also did not often own land, and there was a high literacy rate, again, among the upper class. So some similarities. They can also be priestesses. However, the citizenship is a key difference. And actually, women in Sparta were seen, especially strong women, they were very much valued for bearing children, especially male children who were strong and made good warriors. So women in Sparta were really respected for raising warrior sons. Some major trends. So we have Hellenism is a key word you need to know, and it means the spread of Greek culture. And Greek culture was spread throughout the Eastern Mediterranean, along the Mediterranean Sea, and it was Alexander the Great and his conquests who made this happen. Some background on Alexander the Great. He was the son of a Macedonian king, so he was a Macedonian prince. Macedonia is the territory just north of Greece. And Alexander the Great, in Athens and Sparta's weakened state, he was able to take over most of the city-states of Greece, and he continued to spread eastward into the Middle East. So you can see here the land controlled by Alexander the Great at the height of his empire. You can also see Macedon, which is where Alexander the Great is from. Athens is on here, and Sparta. And then take a moment just to notice Egypt and the relation of them. The Ptolemaic kingdom, for some reference, goes as far back as early Athens, a time of early Athens in Greece. So this is under Egypt's control. Other major trends. Responsible for agriculture production is largely the slaves, which means the slaves are working in the fields all day. There's not exactly educated people who are doing these tasks, who are thinking about how to make these field tasks easier. And so with a large slave population, we have very limited innovation in agricultural technologies. Conflicts that arise because of this is we have tensions between social classes, we have some slave revolts, and then there are large tensions actually between the farming class and the upper class. The upper class, the aristocracy in Greece, was often trying to kick the peasant farming class off of their land and try to own it and make the peasant farming class into slaves or into indentured servants who owed them a certain amount of crop, etc. And the peasant farmers were very resistant to this. Other trends between Athens and Sparta are that there's some sort of representative government. So people are paying attention to the decisions being made. So in Athens, you have a democracy, which is the only representation comes from, again, male landowning people of Greek origin. And in Sparta, we have an aristocracy, so the most respected elder males on a panel would make the decisions. Here we have Cicero. Go ahead and read what he says. Just kidding, that's in Latin. But he says, to be ignorant of what occurred before you were born is to always remain a child. For what is the time of a man except to be connected with the memory of ancient things of an older age? So what do you think that means? I think that Cicero really valued history. Go Cicero. Now we're switching to economic developments in Greece. This is the pictures and the images at the end. Here we have a drawing of the city of Athens. Up in the middle, the elevated area is called the Acropolis. Notice the architecture, it's very traditional of classical Greece. You have tall buildings, square, with large stone columns, topped in a triangle, some geometric shapes. We have a lot of space for the gathering of people to make votes, to communicate, etc. So again, Greece is a very agrarian or agricultural based economy, and there's this tension because land is so limited. There's the tension between the upper class, the aristocracy, and the peasant farmers for land. So the major economies in Greece, the largest is farming, but we also have slavery and trading slaves, and trade as a whole, trading artwork, trading fish, etc. As we look at this map of Greece, we notice that it's made up mostly of islands and it's very mountainous. So this is the reason that Greece was decentralized into city-states. Again, remember these city-states are interacting, but they still have their own individual governments and cultures, etc. So a couple results of Greece's geography is that the land is very limited, and especially the farmland. So even where there is farmland and people are able to grow crops, since it's on the side of a mountain and rather rocky, the farmland is not very good for growing grains and starches that sustain us or can be used for subsistence farming. Instead, Greece is a major producer of olives and grapes for making, think about olive oil and wine. If you have ever survived on olive oil and wine, I'd be very surprised. So that posed a problem for Greece, that they didn't have a key crop on which to live, which meant that they had to trade, then traded with all our civilizations along the Mediterranean. So if you look back on the front of your notes, this means they traded with Rome. When Rome started to rise, they traded with Carthage. They traded with Egypt, all our civilizations on the Mediterranean Sea. Also, because Greece is surrounded by water, they had a very strong fishing economy, as you might have expected. Lastly, to reiterate what we covered before, the Greeks, especially the Athenians, were well known for their art, and they also had a large industry of producing and became specialists in pottery. And the pottery was used for storing grain, for storing liquids, and for depicting scenes and telling stories for decoration. So that was another key product of classical Athens. That's all for tonight. I hope you have a good night. See you tomorrow.